The light in the kitchen was still on when Allison Gardner vanished from the Maple Ridge neighborhood of Fayetteville, Arkansas, a college town of 73,580 people nestled against the Ozark Mountains. Early spring night had arrived, with a thick blanket of fog draping the narrow streets that wound through the quiet suburb. Allison's neighbor, Marlene Porter, waved through her kitchen window as the 25-year-old cyclist walked down the narrow path separating their two modest wooden houses, carrying a stainless steel water bottle. Allison was returning the bottle that Mrs. Porter had lent her earlier that afternoon, a silver one with a twist cap that the older woman had owned for nearly 30 years. The elderly woman watched Allison's figure slowly dissolve into the gently rolling fog, the navy blue jacket she wore the last splash of color to disappear against the dark tree line. What happened in the minutes that followed would haunt Fayetteville for more than 13 years. Before we dive deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. Fayetteville in the early spring of 2010 carried a quiet chill that slipped between the old houses and down the narrow roads descending from the Ozarks, leaving behind the characteristic light dampness of Arkansas. Afternoon stretched into evening, fog began clinging to the metal street signs, and the lone yellow porch lights of the older homes reflected blurred and hazy through the cool air. Against that backdrop, Allison Rourke returned to her small rented house tucked away in a quiet alley near Dixon Street after a long cycling training ride. She had spent nearly the entire day on the rocky slopes leading to the edge of the Ozarks, and her tired body still carried the lingering excitement in the corners of her eyes. Evan Merrick, her training partner and the last person with her that night, followed behind on his bike to make sure she got inside safely. He stopped in the backyard, waiting until Allison opened the old wooden kitchen door, turned back to nod at him, and gave a faint smile like a final goodnight. Light from inside spilled a thin stripe across the damp concrete, then the door closed, leaving Evan standing in the thick stillness of a Fayetteville night. The street was completely empty, only the wind threading through metal awnings and a vague, hard-to-name unease that clung to every breath. The next morning, when Allison's roommate returned, the house felt unnaturally quiet. No running water, no footsteps, no sign that Allison had just stepped out or was getting ready for another ride. Her phone lay silent. Calls went unanswered. None of her other friends in Fayetteville, none of her training partners, had seen her since the night before. Worry spread minute by minute as calls, texts, and every form of contact fell into absolute silence. In Vermont, where Allison's parents lived, the phone rang constantly. They called their daughter over and over, clinging to hope that the signal was weak, that she had overslept, that everything unusual was just a misunderstanding. But the entire morning passed, then noon, with no response. The silence began to take shape as real fear, and by afternoon, after every possible place had been searched, after neighbors, friends, and teammates all said they had no idea where she was, after every reasonable explanation had been ruled out, Allison's family had no choice but to face something they never thought they would. They picked up the phone and called the Fayetteville Police Department to report that their daughter was missing. The Fayetteville Police Department received the missing person report for Allison Rourke late that afternoon, as the last sunlight painted thin red-orange streaks across the windows of the dispatch room. The dispatcher noted the trembling voice of a mother calling from Vermont, describing how her daughter had not been in contact for many hours, and none of her friends in Fayetteville could find her. The initial details: a young, healthy athlete with a stable routine and no history of suddenly leaving, immediately told the officer on duty that this was not a typical runaway or someone simply out of touch. Something was wrong. Within minutes, the nearest patrol unit was sent to Allison's rental house, along with an experienced detective from the Criminal Investigation Division. By the time they arrived, the neighborhood had settled into a quiet late afternoon. Allison's small house looked deceptively peaceful, as if nothing unusual had happened in the past 24 hours. The patrol approached the back door. The one family members said was where Allison was last seen, but everything was in place. No signs of forced entry, no scratches on the frame, no misaligned hinges. The door opened with a spare key provided by the roommate. Inside, the house was wrapped in heavy silence, nothing like the usual bustle of young people sharing a place near Dixon Street. The investigators moved room by room, noting every small detail. The kitchen was clean, dishes washed and stacked neatly. No spilled cups, no scattered items, no signs of a struggle. The living room was the same. Chairs, bags, jackets, all exactly where they belonged. Only when they entered Allison's bedroom did the wrongness become unmistakable. The bed was perfectly made, no sign she had left in a hurry. Her phone was nowhere in the room. Her wallet was still on the nightstand. Her passport, bank cards, and important personal items were all there. Her high-end bicycle, the one she was rarely without, was not in the house, but that didn't narrow anything down because she often took it with her. Still, the detective immediately noted, a person like Allison leaving without her phone was almost unthinkable. There were no signs of a struggle, no disturbed furniture, no scuff marks on the floor, no broken glass, no drag marks. But that absolute tidiness made the atmosphere feel off, as though a living moment had been cleanly cut out of the space with no trace of how it disappeared. The crime scene technician documented the entire layout, then compared it to the roommate's description. Nothing suggested Allison had packed for an overnight trip, let alone a permanent move. A quick conversation with the roommate at the scene only reinforced that this disappearance was not normal. Allison was disciplined. She always let people know about long rides or any schedule changes. Phone off, personal items left behind, house undisturbed. All pointed in one direction. This was not a voluntary departure. Based on these factors, the detective classified the case as missing under suspicious circumstances, elevating it beyond a standard missing person report. The department immediately formed an initial investigative team, a lead detective, 2 officers for information gathering, and a data analyst to track the victim's movements and habits. They quickly recontacted the roommate for a more detailed statement, began compiling lists of friends in Fayetteville, the cycling group, everyone who trained with her the previous day, and especially the person confirmed to be the last one with her. Not long after, Evan Merrick was asked to come to the Fayetteville Police Department late that afternoon, as the shadows lengthened on the road leading to headquarters. He arrived early, looking a little tense but cooperative, still wearing the thin jacket dusted with dirt from the previous day's ride. In the small interview room, the detective explained that this was standard procedure when a missing person was last seen with someone, and that Evan's cooperation was essential to reconstruct the full timeline before Allison vanished. Evan nodded repeatedly, hands clasped under the table as if to steady himself. He confirmed right away that yes, he was the last person to see Allison. They had trained together all afternoon on a route along the eastern edge of Fayetteville, where the Rocky Hills meet the Ozarks. Evan described it as a long but fairly normal session for Allison, who could always maintain a high pace, even though she had only been in Arkansas a few days. He said she looked a bit tired, but in control, with no signs of exhaustion or emotional distress. The 2 of them split from the group near Farm Road 43, then rode slowly back toward town, as it got dark. The detective asked Evan to go over the return trip in more detail. Evan recounted every small movement. They stopped once for water near a small bridge over a low creek, then rode a few more miles before entering the neighborhood. When they reached Allison's rental, he followed behind to make sure she got to the door safely. He clearly described the moment she opened the back door. The kitchen light was on dimly. Allison turned to thank him, then closed the door. Evan said he saw no one following them, no strange cars parked nearby, no unusual sounds or events. The detective noted that quickly, because in missing person cases, observations that seem unimportant can sometimes be key. They asked Evan to pinpoint exactly when he left the house. He closed his eyes for a few seconds, trying to picture it, and said the whole thing pulling into the yard, waiting for her to open the door, saying goodbye. Took only a few minutes before he turned back toward the main road. The detective asked whether Allison had said anything unusual before going inside, like seeming upset, stressed, or mentioning personal matters. Evan shook his head and said Allison was completely normal, tired from the long ride, but in a good mood. She didn't mention plans to go anywhere that evening, had no meetings scheduled, and didn't say anything about leaving the house after he left. When asked about their relationship, Evan was straightforward. They were training partners who had known each other a few months and had done some small races together, but nothing romantic. He emphasized that Allison was very focused on the upcoming racing season and usually avoided distractions. The detective recorded everything, then moved on to building a detailed timeline: what time the ride started, where they rested, who else in the group saw them that afternoon, who saw them leave the group, whether the route had cameras or passed through busy areas. Evan cooperated fully, pausing occasionally to remember, but never dodging a question. He provided fairly accurate times, thanks to his habit of using a training watch. Even though 2010 models didn't have GPS, it was enough to help investigators estimate the total ride length and return time. The detective noticed Evan showed no excessive nervousness, no defensiveness, no blaming others, no attempt to downplay his role that night. That led them to classify him temporarily as a key witness rather than a suspect. The interview shifted to questions about Allison's other relationships: friends, teammates, recent acquaintances, anyone she had issues with. Evan mentioned a few names from the cycling group, but when asked if anyone had conflicts or jealousy toward Allison, he paused briefly, then said he couldn't think of anyone specific. The detective noted that without reacting or letting it slide, they continued asking about Evan's movements after leaving Allison's house. Evan described the short, quiet ride back to his own apartment with no stops. He offered to let police examine his bike and training watch if needed. Before ending the interview, the detective read the timeline back for final confirmation: a multi-hour ride, splitting from the group on the outskirts, riding back to town in the dark, Evan escorting her to the back door, no one else appearing, no unusual signs, and Allison seeming completely normal before disappearing. When Evan left the room, the detective sat back down in front of the rough timeline sketched on the table, underlining points that needed verification: the return route, exact times, the last people they saw, the location of the bike and lighting around the house. Everything looked reasonable, but that very reasonableness somehow made Allison's disappearance even harder to explain. Verification of witnesses around Allison's neighborhood began the next morning, once the team had a preliminary timeline from Evan Merrick's statement. Fayetteville still had a thin layer of fog over the sloped roofs and front lawns, but officers fanned out in small groups, knocking on every door near Allison's rental to find out if anyone had seen or heard anything the night she vanished. Most neighbors were students or local workers used to quiet evenings, so the sudden police presence raised plenty of questions. A middle-aged woman living right next door said she noticed the kitchen light in Allison's house stayed on quite late, but she didn't see anyone coming or going. She was certain there were no loud noises, no arguments, no signs of disturbance, just a long, silent night like any other on the street. That matched Evan's account. Allison went inside normally, and no one appeared afterward. A male student living across the alley said he got home late after a shift at a coffee shop near Dixon Street. As he passed by, Allison's backyard was dark, except for the faint light spilling from the kitchen door and a bicycle leaning against the wall. He didn't see anyone in the yard or anything unusual. The investigators noted that detail because it helped confirm Allison apparently didn't leave immediately after Evan left. Several other neighbors were asked about noises, car headlights, strange figures, or anything out of the ordinary. All gave the same answer: nothing. One neighbor, a veteran known for being observant, said that if anyone had been wandering the area late at night, he definitely would have noticed. It was a habit from years of service, but that night, he said it was so quiet you could hear the wind hitting the door. When the team spoke again with the landlord, a middle-aged man who lived a few blocks away, he confirmed Allison was tidy, on time with rent, and never noisy. He had received no notice that she planned to move or leave Fayetteville. He also hadn't seen any strangers around the house recently. The landlord added that the back door was notoriously hard to open unless you knew exactly how much force to use. That led the detective to note that if anyone else had entered or exited that night, neighbors likely would have heard the door, yet no one did. The anomalies were decreasing rather than increasing. After finishing the neighborhood canvass, the team moved on to the other riders from the previous day's training session. 3 group members were brought in for statements. One female rider said Allison seemed completely normal during the ride, focused, a little tired from the fast pace, but not worried or distracted by personal issues. Another said Allison had mentioned wanting to review race maps that evening, but never said she was meeting anyone afterward. No one saw Allison leave the ride early or talk to strangers on the way back. Evan and Allison splitting off to ride slowly into town was routine and didn't raise any eyebrows. When asked about Allison's relationships within the group, all 3 insisted she was friendly, had no conflicts with anyone, and showed no signs of avoiding or fearing anyone in recent days. One recalled that Allison had been texting her family more than usual since arriving in Fayetteville, but she never mentioned anything unusual. That didn't shed new light, but reinforced that Allison wasn't having problems within the cycling group. After this round of interviews, the team returned to Allison's house for another sweep to see if anything of hers was missing. They discovered no suitcase, no backpack, no clothing or personal items taken. Everything indicated Allison had no reason to leave Fayetteville, no travel plans, and no packed bags. That led to one clear conclusion: if Allison left the house after Evan, she did so without even the bare minimum belongings. That was completely contrary to her daily habits. From the statements of neighbors, the roommate, and training partners, the investigators reached an initial summary: no one saw Allison leave the house, and no one saw any vehicle or stranger that night. That made the moment of her disappearance terrifyingly vague, a complete void with no human witness. When the last interview of the day ended, the detective wrote a short but heavy note in the report. No evidence the victim left Fayetteville voluntarily, no witnesses observed any movement after entry into the residence. This increases the level of abnormality in the disappearance. In the slowly fading afternoon light, the officers walked away from that peaceful neighborhood with a tightness in their throats, as if the quietest places could hide the most unbelievable things. As soon as the neighborhood canvassing and interviews with Allison's training partners were wrapped up, the investigation team moved to what is considered the single most critical step in the first 48 hours of any missing person case, launching an organized grid search operation across the entire area surrounding her house. Morning in Fayetteville began with a thin layer of fog clinging to the low rooftops. The streets were damp, the mist lending every movement a sluggish feel, but the search teams were the exact opposite: focused, urgent, and moving with purpose. Police sealed off a 3-block radius around the last place Allison had been seen, setting boundaries with yellow tape and restricting residents from coming and going so nothing would disturb potential evidence. The steeply pitched roofs and early spring trees, shedding their leaves, created a quiet, almost peaceful scene that felt wholly out of place for someone to vanish completely in just a few hours without a single sound being heard. The lead investigator for the sector stood at a small intersection, marking off grid squares on a paper map that each search team would be responsible for checking. The order was clear: miss nothing, no matter how small. While one group swept the immediate area around the house, the backyard, narrow walkways between units, trash enclosures, old sheds, abandoned vehicles, another began expanding outward along the running and cycling routes Allison was known to use. From statements by Evan and a few members of her cycling group, police had identified 2 regular routes, one heading east, following the rolling hills along the edge of the Ozarks, the other looping through older residential neighborhoods, cutting across an abandoned ball field before joining a narrow road out toward the suburbs. Searchers walked those routes in small teams, spread out in a line just a few meters apart. Each person carried a high-powered flashlight, even though it was still morning, because the beams helped spot small objects among the dry leaves and wet soil. They looked for everything: torn fabric, bits of plastic, shoe prints, personal items, scraps of paper, unusual skid marks. A young officer spotted several indistinct shoe prints on a patch of bare dirt near a trail that led down to a small creek, but the investigator quickly determined they were old, mixed with animal tracks, and showed no movement within the past 24 hours. The trail was a popular jogging spot for local kids, so the prints were too chaotic to yield anything specific. At the same time, a small drone was brought in. Drone technology in 2010 was nowhere near as advanced as it would become a decade later, but it was still useful for scanning portions of the lightly wooded terrain around town. The drone flew low, recording video that the image analysis team reviewed right there on scene, using an old laptop running off an external battery. All it captured was trees, damp earth, and a few scattered patches of sunlight reflecting off puddles. No sign of Allison or any unusual activity from the night she disappeared. Still, the search teams pressed on, widening the radius. They walked every narrow side street around Dixon Street, where the streetlights were dim, the painted lines faded, and the houses nearly silent at night. One officer checked the small parking lot behind a local coffee shop, searching trash bins, under cars, and questioning the morning shift employees. Nothing. No one had seen Allison. No one had seen a strange vehicle. No one had heard any loud noises. The farther they expanded into downtown, the more the search felt futile. Allison appeared to have passed through none of it, appeared on no street, left behind no clue. Police then moved to the longer training route she used, the roads that led out to War Eagle Road. There they stopped at every popular rest spot, the big tree, where athletes often paused for water, the wooden bridge over a small creek, the tight bend that dropped steeply toward the forest edge. Officers again combed every meter, bridge planks, roadside rocks, uneven grass. No fresh bike tire marks, no dropped items, no footprints or scrape marks. One veteran investigator, after reviewing the entire morning's search reports, said only one thing that made the atmosphere even heavier: if she came through here last night, this ground would have something to say. But it's saying nothing at all. By midday, the teams regrouped at the police station to report the entire area around Allison's house had been properly grid searched. There was no evidence whatsoever that she had left the house via the back or traveled any of her usual training routes. It was the very emptiness of the results that became the most alarming. If Allison had left on her own, there should be signs. If someone had taken her, there should be signs. Instead, everything was impossibly clean. Investigators returned to the house one more time to make sure nothing had been missed, but the rooms remained silent, so quiet that even their own small movements echoed. Not the tiniest clue existed. No stray fibers, no scuffs on the carpet, no object out of place. The house felt sealed by Allison's absence itself, an absence that offered no explanation. As the afternoon wore on, the team had to log a hard fact. The search of the city and Allison's training routes, the foundational step in any missing person case, had produced zero trace. No discoveries, no anomalies, no starting point for a new theory. And that very void began to raise an uncomfortable question. If Allison had not left Fayetteville along any of the routes they had scoured, then where exactly had she disappeared among those familiar stretches? Just when that question still hung in the air and the search seemed stalled, it abruptly shifted direction. A patrol officer, rechecking the route leading east out of Fayetteville, spotted a faint glint beside a trail near War Eagle Road. It was a patch of damp ground beneath the trees, where shafts of light filtered through the leaves in broken patterns, just enough to reveal a sliver of metal caught between dry leaves and mud. When he bent down to pick it up, the officer realized it was an athlete's specialty water bottle cap, the kind many gravel cyclists, including Allison, commonly used. The area was immediately marked off, and the investigation team was called to the scene. War Eagle Road runs along the northern edge of the Ozark Range and was no stranger to local cyclists. Rugged enough to be challenging, yet close enough to town to be a popular training spot. Finding an athlete's item there didn't prove anything conclusive, but the investigators sensed this was the first concrete lead since Allison vanished. When they expanded the search a few meters around the cap's location, they found two more objects, a thin moisture-wicking towel and a small brake adjustment tool, the kind only serious cyclists carry. All three items were scattered without pattern, as if they had fallen during movement, yet there were no signs of a struggle, no disturbance indicating panic. The leaves around them were old. The soil surface wasn't torn or freshly scuffed, giving the impression the items might have been there for hours, possibly days. Wearing gloves, investigators collected each piece into evidence bags and closely examined the surroundings. No fresh footprints, no unusually deep tire ruts, no torn fabric, no blood. Just random dropped items that weren't enough to say anything definitive. Still, the fact that they were exactly the type of things Allison used, in an area she frequently rode, meant the find could not be dismissed. They marked the GPS coordinates and added a small map of the War Eagle Road section to the city search map. The distance from Allison's house to the evidence location was entirely within range if she had actually left on her bike the previous night. Yet everything from the house, the neighbors, and the previously searched routes contradicted that possibility. All evidence indicated Allison never left her home that night. So the evidence at War Eagle Road became a huge question mark. Did Allison come here herself, or did someone bring her things here? That uncertainty caused a brief, heavy silence at the scene, as the lead investigator stood staring into the thin forest beyond the road. Tall pines stretched straight upward, their dense canopy blocking most light and creating a half-lit space that felt like the edge of another world, vast, silent, and impossibly hard to read. A narrow dirt track disappeared deeper into the trees, dotted with puddles still lingering from rain 2 days earlier. If Allison had dropped items here, she might have gone farther in. If someone had planted them to mislead, they had chosen a place where traces disappear easily. Searchers began widening the radius, scanning visually, probing beneath thick leaf litter with sticks, checking every gap between trunks. One young officer reported finding footprints mixed with animal tracks, but they weren't clear enough to identify. That only reinforced the feeling that the forest might have hidden everything for hours without leaving a trace. A veteran detective who had worked Fayetteville for over 2 decades quietly remarked that War Eagle Road and the adjoining Ozark Forest had frustrated many searches before because of the complex terrain, countless unmapped side trails, and especially the way wind and night mist can erase evidence. Hearing that, the search commander made a quick call: expand the grid several hundred meters deeper into the forest on both sides of War Eagle Road, breaking into teams of 3, so no one drifted off the search line. Even though the dropped items showed no signs of violence, they were significant enough to suggest that if there was an answer, it lay inside this forest. Whether Allison had actually been there remained unclear, but the investigation could no longer stop at the roadside. A large map of the Ozark Edge was spread across the hood of a patrol truck, while the commander marked the sectors to be covered that afternoon. The nature of the disappearance was shifting from route-based search to terrain-based search, a new phase, but far riskier. As the officers moved into the woods, the smell of wet earth and decaying leaves rose thickly. Each footstep sank into the soft humus below. From the outside, the Ozarks always looked gentle, but once inside, among trunks dozens of meters tall and shadows, far denser than on the road, you felt how vast it was. A place that swallowed sound. The teams advanced a few meters every minute, eyes fixed on the ground, ears straining for the smallest noise. No new traces, no additional dropped items, no sound or sight to guide them. But now, even without evidence of violence, they had a new direction. War Eagle Road and the forest beside it, and that alone was enough to push the entire search into different territory. Bigger, quieter, and many times more dangerous. While search parties pushed deeper into the Ozark Forest following the scattered items, the investigation team back at Fayetteville PD began the phase of re-examining every clue collected in the first 48 hours, and that was when they realized something critical. 2010 was still an era when technological limitations could choke an investigation right at the starting line. The surveillance cameras they collected from Allison's neighborhood were all old analog models, grainy, low resolution, poor low-light performance, limited angles. Of the 7 cameras police located in the area, Only 2 were functioning reliably, the night Allison disappeared, and even those only captured vague movement of vehicle shapes and shadowy figures. What frustrated the team most was the complete inability to read any license plate from vehicles that passed through the relevant time window between late evening and early morning. The numbers were shattered by low resolution. The yellowish streetlights turned plates into useless glowing smears. The lead investigator stared at the hopelessly blurry footage of what might have been a Jeep, nothing more than a dark blob under weak streetlight, and could only shake his head. With the tech we've got, we've hit the wall. Analog cameras can't give us one more pixel. In 2010, enhancing a plate or identifying a driver was simply impossible. It wasn't just the cameras. Allison's phone data created another dead end. She carried an early-generation smartphone whose GPS located only by cell tower triangulation with an error radius of over a mile. When police requested location records from the carrier, they received only a huge circled area, essentially all of East Fayetteville, rather than a precise point. More importantly, the data simply stopped the evening before she vanished. After that, the signal grew faint and disappeared, but whether the phone was turned off, died, or was destroyed was unknown. No precise timeline from the phone, no readable plates from cameras. Everything stayed truly murky. On top of that, Fayetteville's weather that week became an invisible enemy. Persistent damp rain every night turned the already soft Ozark forest soil into mush, meaning any footprints, drag marks, or light tire tracks would wash away within hours. Police tried bringing in tracking dogs along War Eagle Road, but the humidity was so high and the ground scent so heavy that the dogs couldn't distinguish new from old. One veteran handler said that under these conditions, a trail could be completely washed out after 2 nights. Thick fog also rendered helicopter reconnaissance useless. From above, the canopy looked like one solid green carpet with no gaps or anomalies visible. Limitation piled on limitation. Cameras that couldn't see, GPS that couldn't pinpoint, weather that erased evidence, and scattered items that pointed nowhere specific. The team tried running movement simulations for Allison, but those were based purely on guesswork with no hard data to back them. In morning briefings, investigators kept spreading out maps, but the more they looked, the emptier everything felt. They were forced to rely on technology from a time when tools were still too primitive to crack a sophisticated disappearance. A young officer, only 3 years on the job, said it felt like trying to find someone in the woods while looking through a mud-smeared window. In the end, they had to admit that the tools available in 2010 were almost incapable of producing a breakthrough. The lead investigator wrote a short line in the internal report that later became the most accurate description of that phase. If Allison was taken by someone with intent and a vehicle, we do not have 2010 tools to see through the silence of that Fayetteville night. And that silence tightened around the investigation, strangling every lid, letting the disappearance drift into a gray zone, one where the technological limits of the time were unwittingly helping to conceal the truth. As the search in the Ozark forest continued to stall, and the technological limitations of 2010 left many investigative leads murky, the Fayetteville police decided to return to the starting point. Evan Merrick, the last person to see Allison alive, not because they suspected him, but because with every clue scattered and disconnected, re-examining all data related to Evan was a necessary step to ensure no detail was overlooked. The second interview took place in a small interrogation room with pale gray walls, harsh white fluorescent lights, and air thick with the smell of stale coffee. Evan walked in looking visibly exhausted, dark circles under his eyes from many sleepless nights. When he sat down, he didn't ask anything, just crossed his arms over his chest as if trying to hold himself together. The investigator began by explaining the reason: we need to confirm every detail again and go through all the data connected to you, not because you're a suspect, but because this is mandatory procedure when a case isn't moving forward. Evan nodded, looking like he had mentally prepared himself. They asked to inspect his vehicle, an old silver pickup truck. The truck was brought into the police department's forensic garage. A team of technicians opened every door, checked the floor mats, the truck bed, the undercarriage, and the tire treads for traces of mud, twigs, or fabric fibers that might link it to the War Eagle Road area. But everything was normally clean. No fresh mud, no unusual marks, nothing indicating the vehicle had left the city limits on the night Allison disappeared. The truck's built-in GPS was even less helpful. It was an older system that only recorded locations when the navigation feature was actively used, and that night, Evan hadn't turned it on. Next, police collected Evan's phone for data extraction. Since phones in 2010 didn't yet track detailed GPS journeys, investigators could only access text messages, call logs, and cell tower connections. Evan provided his passcode immediately, without hesitation. The call log confirmed he had no contact with Allison after leaving her house. Their last call had been before the bike training session. The text messages between them in the preceding week were completely normal, discussing training times, race schedules, route planning, with no arguments, tension, or signs of conflict. When cross-referencing the time Evan said he left Allison's house with his phone data, everything matched perfectly. There were no calls or text from him during the critical window, and no tower pings indicating he had left the Fayetteville area that night. Investigators asked whether he had turned his phone off at any point. Evan replied, "I left it on the kitchen counter while I showered. Other than that, no." Cell tower records back this up. His phone stayed connected to the same tower near his apartment complex all night. They then asked to examine Evan's training watch, the kind athletes use to monitor heart rate and distance. Though an older model without precise GPS, it still logged the end time of his workout. The data showed his heart rate steadily declining after he got home, and no sudden spikes, making it highly unlikely he left the house again afterward. Investigators also compared his first and second statements for inconsistencies. There were virtually none. Evan recounted the events with the same level of detail: a long training ride, a brief conversation, dropping Allison off at her back door, standing on the porch for a few seconds, then leaving. When pressed further about his impressions, whether Allison seemed stressed, worried, or followed, Evan just shook his head. Nothing, completely normal. Police applied mild pressure with probing questions. "Are you sure? Did you notice any strange cars parked nearby? Did anyone contact her while you were there?" But Evan stuck to a consistent narrative: no wavering, no changes, no signs of concealment. For added certainty, investigators revisited Evan's daily routine for the entire week before the disappearance: where he trained, whom he met, classes he attended. Every statement was corroborated by friends and instructors. There were no gaps. A surveillance officer reviewing footage near Evan's apartment also confirmed no suspicious vehicles entered or left the area during the time Evan claimed to be home. At the end of the interview, the lead investigator wrote in the internal report, "No deception detected, no significant contradictions, behavior consistent with genuine cooperation." Evan Merrick left the second interrogation looking even more drained than after the first. When police returned his phone, he asked only one question in a quiet, choked voice: "Have you found anything new?" They didn't answer, just told him to remain available for further questions if needed. The interview ended, but its very emptiness, no contradictions, no mistakes, no leads, made the investigation feel even more alarming. If Evan was not involved, then who was the last person to touch Allison? And how did they take her without leaving a trace? As the lines of inquiry centered on Evan Merrick gradually revealed no inconsistencies or signs of lying, the Fayetteville investigation team began expanding their scrutiny to Allison's wider social circle and anyone indirectly connected. It was at this point that the name Sienna Hale first appeared prominently in the case notes. Sienna was Evan's on-again, off-again girlfriend. Or more accurately, they were trying to figure things out again, an ambiguous situation that had previously caused some friction between them. When investigators reviewed Evan's phone messages, they found several exchanges with Sienna from about 2 weeks before the disappearance, revolving around taking a break needing space, and not wanting to get caught up in cycling group drama. The tone indicated tension. One of Sienna's final messages read, "I don't understand why you have to spend so much time with Allison." That sentence caught the investigators' attention. Although it contained no overt threat, it suggested possible negative feelings toward Allison, something they hadn't previously considered. When summoned to the station for questioning, Sienna arrived confident yet guarded. Investigators asked about the dynamic among the three of them. Sienna said she had no problem with Allison, but her words didn't hide the stiffness in her eyes. When pressed on whether she had ever been upset that Evan trained with Allison, Sienna replied bluntly, "I didn't feel threatened, but obviously I didn't like him prioritizing someone else." An ambiguous statement, but enough to place her on the police watch list, not because of evidence, but because jealousy is a motive that can never be ruled out in missing person cases. Investigators asked Sienna for her timeline on the night Allison vanished. She said she was home alone, watching a movie, then went to bed early. When asked if anyone could verify that, she paused for a few seconds before answering, "No, I live alone." Did she go anywhere that night? No. Did anyone visit? No. Did she call or text anyone? She said she just watched the movie and left her phone on silent. Up to that point, nothing seemed particularly unusual, until police compared her statement with cell provider records. They discovered her phone was completely powered off from around 9 p.m. until nearly 2 a.m., exactly overlapping the window when Allison is believed to have disappeared. When confronted about this, Sienna said her phone died, and she plugged it in and left it until morning. However, carrier data showed the device did not reconnect to the network immediately upon being charged, something that typically happened with phones of that era. The 5-hour absence from the network became a red flag. There was no evidence placing her near Allison's house. No witnesses saw her anywhere suspicious. No camera captured her car moving through town, though the poor quality of analog cameras made identification difficult. But the fact that someone with emotional friction and a potential jealousy motive had turned her phone off during the precise critical hours made Sienna a focal point of interest. Police asked to examine her car. Result: completely clean. No fresh mud, no Ozark gravel, no signs of use that night. A search of her apartment also turned up nothing noteworthy. No strange items, no dirty clothes, no signs of a struggle. Everything was normal to an almost unbelievable degree. The first interview ended with more questions than answers. The lead investigator wrote in the report, "Possible motive exists. Opportunity unverified. Signs of concealment present but no physical or technological evidence to support." A younger officer in the room whispered, "She could be innocent, but if Allison was taken in a different vehicle or lured somewhere, we can't rule it out." With no physical evidence, police had to classify Sienna as a low-level person of interest. Not enough to treat her as a suspect, but not enough to clear her entirely. Like a thin cloud, her presence in the case wasn't clear enough to see its full shape, yet not light enough to disappear from investigative sight. And when every other avenue led to a dead end, the name Sienna Hale hung in the air like a knot not yet tightened, ready to cinch at any moment if a single new clue shifted the balance. It was against that backdrop that the black Jeep first caught the technical unit's eye one late afternoon. While investigators were painstakingly re-examining every camera around Allison's neighborhood in hopes of finding something clearer than the previous grainy, meaningless shadows. An old analog camera mounted on the porch roof of the house across the street, barely functional except on dry days, unexpectedly captured a frame sharp enough to make the entire team take notice. In the minutes right after Evan left Allison's house, a street light glinted off a dark object moving slowly down the narrow road. When technicians zoomed in frame by frame, the dim light and low quality distorted the image, but they could still make out a boxy, tall vehicle with a hard top, very much resembling a black Jeep Wrangler. The footage was badly corrupted. However, the license plate was just a white blur, the wheels were black streaks without structure, and the vehicle's outline was stretched due to the camera's slow scan rate. They couldn't determine the model year, whether it had a bike rack, or even how many people were inside. As the team watched the clip over and over, they could only agree on one thing. It was the strongest lead they'd had, and also the most useless. The technical report stated clearly, license plate unreadable, exact time uncertain, direction of travel after frame unknown. The old interlaced recording technology made every moving object appear elongated and smeared. When the Jeep neared the edge of the frame, its shape became so distorted that technicians had to freeze individual fields and strip away layers of noise to salvage any detail. Every attempt yielded the same result, nothing recoverable. Police knew that in 2010 Fayetteville, black Jeeps were common, owned by students, outdoor enthusiasts, and people who worked outside the city. One of them could have been completely innocent and simply passing by. But the fact that it appeared at the exact critical time forced investigators to treat it as a serious possibility. They compiled a list of Jeep owners within a 5-mile radius of the neighborhood, but the number was overwhelming, and they had no way to prove which, if any, was the vehicle in the video. They canvassed residents, asking if anyone owned a black Jeep or had seen one lingering in the area around that time. But responses were vague. One person recalled seeing a Jeep often parked near the eastern woods. Another said a Jeep sometimes drove past late at night. An elderly resident remembered one parked near a gas station once, but couldn't recall when. No information was precise enough to pursue. The lead investigator watched the clip dozens of times in the briefing room, each time wondering if he was missing something. But no matter the angle or zoom level, the technological limits of 2010 had slammed the door on a potentially vital clue. In a closed-door meeting, a young technician demonstrated an attempt using early image enhancement software. After 2 hours of processing, the result was still just an indecipherable black blob. The team concluded they could only log the Jeep's presence. They couldn't tie it to any individual. The available information wasn't enough to obtain a search warrant for a specific vehicle, much less bring someone in for questioning just because their car kind of looks like the one in the video. That helplessness made the meeting room feel heavy. One young officer said, "If this camera had been just 10% clearer, we could have read the plate, but it wasn't. And they didn't have the technology to make it so." Ultimately, the internal report carried a deeply frustrated conclusion. The black Jeep footage represents the strongest lead currently available, but due to technical limitations, it is impossible to authenticate the vehicle, license plate, or driver. Lead lacks sufficient investigative value at this time, and so, a shadowy vehicle that might have been the key to the entire case became just another meaningless dark shape, gliding across the screen long enough to spark hope, yet too blurred to do anything but drag the investigation deeper into deadlock. When the blurry black Jeep was removed from the list of viable leads and cell tower data failed to form any meaningful travel pattern, the investigation into Allison's disappearance entered a state of limbo, neither progressing nor able to close. The investigators sat around the table, facing thick case files, maps marked with faded highlighter, and scattered physical items that never pointed in the same direction. The search teams in the Ozarks, after weeks of combing every dirt road, creek bed, and vehicle-accessible area, returned with just 2 heavy words: nothing at all. No body, no drag marks, no torn clothing, no suspicious tire tracks, not a single biological trace to test. Everything they did find, a few small items like a water bottle, a glove fragment, a hair tie, could have been dropped during earlier training rides and could not be definitively tied to the night Allison vanished. Without a body, police couldn't open a homicide file. Without clear surveillance footage, they couldn't reconstruct who came or left the house. Without accurate GPS data, they couldn't confirm Allison ever reached War Eagle Creek or whether the signal was coincidental. Without eyewitnesses, they had no description of any stranger or strange vehicle. And worst of all, there was no physical evidence strong enough to place a suspect near Allison during the most critical window. Sienna Hale, despite the suspicious hours her phone was off, still had no trace of criminal involvement. Evan Merrick, the last person to see Allison, had no contradictions in his statements. No signs of a struggle inside the house. No blood, no scratches or displaced furniture. The door was normally locked. The house was tidy, just as always. All of this turned even the strongest theories into mere speculation. The final 2010 case review meeting took place in a closed room, filled only with the steady hum of a ceiling fan and the faint smell of old paper. The lead investigator went through each item, initial leads too vague, physical evidence not directly related, useless cameras, unverifiable cell signals, witnesses who saw nothing, persons of interest with no proof of wrongdoing, and most crucially, no way to determine how Allison left the house, or at whose will. Unable to connect the facts into a logical sequence, they faced a completely sealed wall. The summary report sent to the Arkansas State Police contained one line that weighed heavily on the entire team. Case exhibits no actionable leads. No further investigative steps can be taken at this time. That was bureaucratic language for saying the case, though not officially closed, had gone silent. Allison's family was informed during a winter afternoon phone call the official search was being suspended. The file would move to periodic monitoring status. No one uttered the phrase cold case, but everyone understood. A missing person investigation left with only faint marks. No direction, no journey, no life, no truth. Allison's file was assigned a new case number and placed on the metal shelves of the Unsolved Crimes Archive. A cold steel rack, exactly as the system labels them, cold cases. On the cover, the 2010 disappearance date sat motionless like a temporary period, and also like a reminder that this case wasn't truly closed, only frozen in unsolved darkness. That year in Fayetteville, silence didn't just settle over the street where Allison once lived. It blanketed the entire investigation, silence because there was no cry for help, no witness voice, no footsteps to follow, and no answer to the most important question: where did Allison disappear to, and how? In the years that followed, the file remained untouched on the shelf, like an unhealed fracture waiting for a moment when technology or an unexpected break could melt the ice of 2010. But by the end of that year, with no new evidence, no viable lines of inquiry, and no budget to dig deeper, the case officially entered hibernation. Cold case. By 2023, after more than 13 years gathering dust, and with the Allison Gardner case file considered almost beyond saving, a new interdisciplinary program in Arkansas, combining the cold case unit, a digital forensics lab, and an AI-driven image restoration team, decided to place the Allison case among the first 3 files chosen for testing, partly because it was a nobody missing person case, and partly because the raw 2010 data had never been processed with modern tools. That decision, originally made simply to test the capabilities of next-generation AI models, unexpectedly produced the breakthrough almost no one still believed possible. First, the AI image restoration team took the decayed analog surveillance footage from 2010, including the video that had captured a black Jeep briefly passing the street where Allison lived. At the time, the video quality was so poor that technicians in 2010 couldn't read the license plate, couldn't identify the exact model, and weren't even certain it was truly a Jeep or just an older SUV. But 2023 technology far surpassed that era. The AI model could reconstruct frames based on motion patterns, predictively remove noise based on object recognition, sharpen edges using deep learning algorithms, and cross-reference millions of vehicle samples in federal databases to identify design features. After nearly 2 weeks of processing, a large TV in the cold case conference room displayed the first restored image. The black Jeep was no longer a blurry blob, but sharp enough to reveal the roofline, tire shape, and most crucially, a small decal on the left rear door that resembled the logo of an independent yoga studio that had operated in Austin between 2015 and 2018. The AI team froze the frame and zoomed in on the decal, a white 3-petaled lotus symbol with tiny, very faint lettering beneath it that the AI attempted to reconstruct: SoulFlow. When investigators cross-checked every registered vehicle in the Fayetteville area and surrounding regions from 2010-2015. No Jeep Wrangler carried a matching decal. This stunned the team. They researched the history of Soulflow Yoga Studio and discovered the studio did not exist in 2010. It only opened in Austin in 2015, meaning the decal had to have been applied after 2015. Yet it appeared in 2010 footage, which was impossible. However, upon closer technical analysis, the AI team realized the decal in the 2010 footage was not a real decal at all. It was an image artifact overlaid onto the vehicle's surface due to analog noise and the restoration algorithm pulling from external training data. This was a rare but known error. The AI had reconstructed edges based on similar patterns in its database, while the original object was merely a light reflection that happened to mimic the decal shape. Yet this very artifact gave the technical team a new lead. If the AI could detect surface contours and a reflection shaped like a fake decal, it meant the real vehicle did have some small pattern or object, just one the old analog camera couldn't resolve clearly. They reran the simulation focusing on light refraction, and after 3 days, the AI identified the actual decal on the 2010 vehicle as a teardrop-shaped design, extremely common on stickers used by certain independent yoga practitioners. This led investigators straight to a name they thought had been buried forever. Sienna Hale, who had worked part-time as a yoga instructor while living in Fayetteville, later moved to Austin and then vanished from Texas records in 2017. A black Jeep with a teardrop decal had previously been identified as belonging to one of Sienna's relatives, but police in 2010 lacked evidence to pursue it further. The second breakthrough came from reconstructing cell tower signal maps using 2023 technology. In 2010, phone pings were nearly useless, narrowing location only to areas several miles wide. In 2023, however, technology could reconstruct intersection points of multiple towers using physical modeling, account for signal refraction caused by terrain, and recreate probable movement paths on the night Allison disappeared. When applied to Allison's phone, the map showed a series of weak connections drifting northeast, moving slowly along a route, roughly matching the drive to War Eagle Creek. The real shock came from analyzing Sienna Hale's pings. Her phone was believed to have been off from 9 p.m. to 2 a.m., but the 2023 model revealed something entirely new. Although the phone sent no active connection signals, it still emitted tiny background pings, the kind towers recorded only as noise because the device wasn't fully powered down. Pings the 2010 systems routinely ignored. When those background pings were amplified by AI and overlaid on the map, they showed Sienna's phone was not at home that night. It was moving along a path nearly identical to Allison's, and at certain moments both noise signals appeared within range of the same War Eagle tower. This demolished Sienna's alibi in minutes of discussion. A young investigator nearly jumped out of his chair when he saw the reconstructed map. She wasn't home, she was out on the road that night. And she went exactly where we found Allison's things. An emergency meeting was called that same day. Every officer involved attended. They uncovered another detail. The period Sienna's phone was off perfectly matched moments when her background pings grew stronger as the vehicle entered signal dead zones, something 2010 technology could never detect. They re-examined all vehicle records linked to Sienna in 2010. She didn't own a Jeep, but she had repeatedly borrowed her cousin's car, who lived in Rogers, a 2008 black Jeep Wrangler sold in 2012. The cousin was brought in for questioning and confirmed Sienna had borrowed the Jeep a few times in 2010, though she couldn't recall exact dates. When asked about the teardrop decal, the cousin replied, "Yes, I had a teardrop sticker on the back. It was the logo of a yoga group I used to go to." The cold case conference room fell into heavy silence. Everything they couldn't prove in 2010, the vehicle, the route, the movement, Sienna's connection to the War Eagle area, now lined up neatly before them in 2023. Like a chain of logic that had simply waited for technology to catch up. At the end of the meeting, The lead investigator wrote in the minutes, cell mapping destroys Sienna Hale's alibi. AI restored footage shows decal shape consistent with vehicle formerly owned by Hale relative. Reconstructed travel paths show significant overlap between Allison's and Sienna's phones on the night of disappearance. One short, heavy line followed. Sienna Hale elevated from person of interest to primary suspect. The Allison Gardner case, frozen for 12 years, had finally begun to thaw. Reconstructing the timeline of the night Allison disappeared became the 2023 investigation team's central task. Immediately after AI restored footage and cell tower mapping illuminated details invisible 12 years earlier. A large workspace was dedicated to simulating every movement of both Allison and Sienna from the afternoon practice session until their phone signals vanished. Giant LED screens on the walls displayed maps of Fayetteville, War Eagle Creek, dirt roads, the Ozark Forest, and a rebuilt cell tower grid using modern data. Everything was linked into a 3D model the AI could animate minute by minute. First, the team extracted every 2010 statement from Evan Merrick, Allison's roommate and neighborhood witnesses. That data was fed into the model to establish a fixed baseline timeline, the unchangeable foundation. Then they layered new data on top. Sienna's background pings, Allison's weak pings, probable vehicle movement at average nighttime speeds, and the restored camera footage. The AI began reconstructing motion in 5-minute increments, then narrowed it to 1-minute increments. By around 10 p.m., the model showed Allison's signal gradually weakening as it drifted northeast, consistent with her either walking or being driven. Simultaneously, the AI detected Sienna's extremely faint background signal drifting in the same direction. An investigator asked, could this be coincidence? But when the model was run 3 separate times, the same result appeared. Every time Allison's signal touched the edge of the second tower's coverage, Sienna's background ping appeared in the same radius, as if both devices were moving through the same area. The AI highlighted the route in red. Next, the model overlaid the restored analog camera footage from Allison's street. The black Jeep appeared just a few dozen meters from Allison's porch at a time that matched Sienna's first background ping. Investigators ran a simulation of vehicle stops, driver exits, approaches, rear door. Using reflected light on the pavement, streetlight flicker timing, and the vehicle's deceleration, the AI simulated the Jeep likely stopping before the camera captured a full view. A light chart showed the vehicle's shadow lengthening across 3 consecutive frames, indicating it slowed or stopped. When simulating the path of a person exiting the vehicle, based on faint shadow edges on the concrete, the AI produced a trajectory consistent with someone walking from near the Jeep to the back fence of Allison's house. That segment lasted over 3 minutes, enough time to reach the rear door where Evan said he had said goodbye to Allison. The simulation couldn't confirm the person's identity, but combined with cell mapping and Sienna's history of borrowing the Jeep, the model assigned an 87% probability that the shadowy figure was Sienna Hale. The team then fed the strained Allison, Evan, Sienna love triangle into a behavioral motive prediction model. The AI flagged jealousy at a high-risk level, especially given old messages from Sienna saying she didn't understand why Evan spent so much time with Allison. 2023 behavioral algorithms could assign weights to emotional factors, personal schedules, and access to transportation. After all data was entered, the model reconstructed the 2010 night as follows. Approx. 9:45 p.m. After Evan leaves Allison's house, Sienna's background pings show she left her residence by vehicle. Approx. 10:10 p.m. Camera captures the black Jeep passing Allison's street slower than normal. Approx. 10:12 p.m. Pixel shadows indicate the Jeep stopped or nearly stopped. Approx. 10:15, 10:18 p.m. Simulated figure approaches the rear door. Approx. 10:20 p.m. Background pings from both phones begin moving toward War Eagle Creek. This indicated Allison was most likely placed in the vehicle and driven away within 10 minutes of Evan leaving. Investigators tested the hypothesis that Allison left voluntarily or on foot. The result, no match. Any pedestrian leaving the house would have passed the corner camera's field of view, yet even in the blurry footage, no human shape appeared afterward. The AI concluded, zero probability Allison left the residence on foot without being recorded. When the model was run 12 times with different parameters, every run converged on the same outcome. Sienna Hale was present in the vicinity of Allison's home. During the exact window, Allison disappeared. After the simulation was complete, the cold case team overlaid cell tower mapping onto topographic maps. They discovered the route to War Eagle Creek, matched paths a local off-road rider, like Sienna, might choose to avoid cameras and streetlights. Signal drop points also aligned with terrain knowledge of someone who had trained extensively in the area. All data was compiled into a minute-by-minute timeline. When presented to the cold case chief, the lights were dimmed to highlight the red trail. Sienna's movement, and the green trail, Allison's signal, gradually merging on their final journey. Every piece pointed to the same conclusion. Sienna had stalked Allison, approached immediately after Evan left, removed her from the house, and driven toward War Eagle Creek. The blind spot of 2010 had finally been illuminated by 2023 technology. When the investigation expanded to trace Sienna's activities from 2012 onward, layer after layer of her disappearance emerged, like a meticulously planned escape map spanning more than a decade. Multiple countries, and multiple identities. After leaving Fayetteville at the end of 2011, Sienna moved to Austin, Texas, and lived there for about 2 years with an outwardly normal life. Renting a small studio apartment, working part-time at a local yoga studio, occasionally giving private lessons to female clients. Income tax records, vehicle registration, and rental history all matched someone trying to build a new life. Yet investigators noticed a red flag when cross-referencing data. Sienna changed apartments 4 times in 2 years, each move taking her farther from central Austin. People who knew her described her as someone who always kept possessions minimal, never made close friends, never talked about her past, and always looked over her shoulder when walking to the parking lot. One witness said Sienna taught her a morning class but then suddenly vanished for 6 weeks before returning to work, as if nothing had happened. That evening Sienna only said, "I needed time." Her official trail in Texas ended in September 2013, when her lease closed, bank account went dormant, and the phone registered to Sienna Hale stopped connecting to any U.S. tower. Investigators later confirmed she sold her cousin's Jeep to a small salvage yard without proper ID. Technically illegal, but the buyer didn't check because the price was low. From there Sienna left Austin the hardest way to trace long-distance bus. No passport stamps, no border records in her name. Everything indicated she deliberately chose routes that left no trail. New 2023 analysis confirmed she headed south and crossed the border on foot. A Laredo border report from the night of September 23, 2013, noted a young woman passing through with temporary Mexican papers under the name Elena Marquez. The ID photo was blurry, but facial biometric ratios matched Sienna at over 90% when analyzed by AI. In Mexico, her journey was pieced together from fragments, mostly hostile dormitory rental logs. Several receptionists shown enhanced photos recognized her. Yes, she stayed here a few weeks. She was described as quiet but friendly enough, using the names Elena, sometimes Sarah, sometimes just B. In 2014 she moved to Puebla, living in temporary expat housing where she began teaching yoga in exchange for meals or cash. A local studio owner remembered she always wore wide-brimmed hats and large sunglasses, and spoke good Spanish. He said, she was focused, disciplined, but nobody really knew where she was from. In 2015 she vanished from Puebla the same way she had left Fayetteville. No notice, no forwarding address, no goodbye. This made the search harder because from that point she left no administrative trace at all. But AI analysis of random tourist photos from Mexican sites located 3 images with facial matches above 92%. The only difference being a changed nose. This led the team to suspect plastic surgery. Following that thread brought them to a small cosmetic clinic in Guadalajara, where a doctor was suspected of operating on undocumented clients. One record stood out: rhinoplastia, pago en efectivo, rhinoplasty, paid in cash. No real name, but the patient was described as a young woman, dyed red hair, closely matching Sienna's hair color at the time. By late 2016, new information showed she had left Mexico for Costa Rica, a country ideal for disappearing, countless hostels, hundreds of transient yoga teachers, and a culture where one can blend in without clear paperwork. When investigators traced yoga classes in Jaco, Santa Teresa, and Montezuma, multiple witnesses described a short-haired brunette, athletic build, American accent but fluent Spanish, using the names Ari, B, or Beth, all matching the AI-reconstructed post-surgery image of Sienna. One hostel owner in Santa Teresa remembered clearly she came asking to teach yoga, said she lost her passport and was waiting for family to send new papers. I didn't believe her, but she taught really well, so I hired her. Another said she avoided large gatherings, rarely allowed photos, and changed rooms every 3 weeks, claiming she didn't want to be bothered. In Costa Rica, Sienna survived doing many cash jobs, teaching yoga and meditation, waiting tables, cleaning hostel rooms, occasionally guiding part-time hikes. Every job paid cash, no contracts, no ID required. She lived like a modern nomad, drifting from beach to town to mountain, as if continually widening the distance between herself and her past. And it was here, in Costa Rica, that Sienna seemed to begin creating a completely new version of herself, hair going from dyed red to brown to black, nose altered, speech patterns changed, contact numbers always prepaid burners, not registered to any real name. Sienna Harris, Sienna Hale, Elena, Sarah, B, Ari, Beth, a different name in every place, a different version with every name. When the 2023 team looked at the map of her journey from Arkansas, Texas, Mexico, Costa Rica, they all agreed this was not mere flight. This was an 11-year, highly disciplined, meticulously prepared plan to stay outside the reach of the law, executed with rare adaptability. One investigator said, "Nobody disappears that well if they're innocent." All the scattered traces from 2012, 2023, when reassembled with modern technology, formed a clear picture. Sienna had deliberately vanished, altered her appearance, changed identities, and moved purposefully across 3 countries. And that picture was about to lead to the biggest turning point yet. A manhunt Arkansas once thought impossible. Santa Teresa, a coastal town of white sand and narrow dirt roads running parallel to the Pacific Ocean, became the new focal point when the Arkansas investigation team, working with Costa Rica police, traced the footsteps of a woman who had called herself Ari, B, or Beth. But according to original records, only one name matched every description: Sienna Hale. The first witness they located was the manager of a small hostel on the edge of the jungle. He immediately recognized the AI-restored image from 2010, even though the face in the photo showed differences due to surgery. He said the woman had lived at the hostel for about 2 months, offering to teach yoga in exchange for a place to stay, and almost never gave any personal information beyond the name Ari. What he remembered most was her eyes. She had a very guarded look, like she was always afraid of being discovered. The witness described Sienna's habits. She never let anyone take photos with her, avoided large gatherings, often sat alone in a corner of the courtyard staring at the ocean, and every night she went for walks, but always chose stretches of road with no lights. These details were immediately entered into the behavioral analysis system. The new data matched the old profile in stunning detail. Sienna in 2010 had also habitually avoided cameras, lived in isolation, and feared leaving traces. The second witness was a yoga instructor at a studio near the center of Santa Teresa. When shown the photo, she nodded instantly. She asked to co-teach a few classes. Slim build, calluses on her wrists from long-distance cycling, and unusually good balance. That detail caught the investigators' attention. Allison was a cyclist, and Sienna had trained with her. Those calluses were a biological marker that AI had previously identified in old footage. The instructor said, Sienna never used her real name, but on a scrap of paper with a temporary teaching schedule, she had signed the initials, H, and then torn it up and thrown it away after class. The studio had kept the scrap as recycled material, and when the investigation team examined it under UV light, the scant handwriting matched Sienna's signature from the 2010 Fayetteville file by 86%. Another witness, the owner of a hilltop restaurant overlooking the ocean, said Sienna had worked there as a waitress, always wearing a wide-brimmed hat and a thin face mask, even though COVID didn't exist yet. He remembered one time she came to work with tape on her nose and slightly swollen lips. She said she got hit by a surfboard, but it looked more like fresh surgery. That detail clarified the earlier Mexico piece. A Guadalajara clinic record noted a woman who had rhinoplasty paid in cash. Two more witnesses at a beachside cafe said they had chatted with Sienna, that she claimed she lost all her documents to theft, but never asked them for help replacing her passport or contacting the embassy. One remembered clearly, "I asked where she was from. She smiled and said it doesn't matter anymore." It sounded really strange. The Arkansas team began piecing it together: nose surgery, hair color changes, yoga work, constant hostel hopping, fake names, and isolated living, all perfectly consistent with someone deliberately concealing their identity. AI analysis of body movement in tourist videos, accidentally recorded in Santa Teresa, showed Sienna's gait, head tilt, slow and even steps, matched 92% of the gait captured on analog camera outside Allison's house in 2010. When investigators spoke to the caretaker of an outdoor yoga area, the man immediately said, "She taught here for a month. Whenever local police came into town, she'd change her route or disappear all day." They also found a torn notebook left behind in Sienna's locker at an old hostel, where she had departed in a hurry. The only readable page was written in English: "Do not go back to Arkansas. Do not let anyone follow me. Do not tell anyone the truth." This was living evidence, not proof of guilt, but the spine of an entire decade-plus pattern of flight. One more witness, an American who had lived in Santa Teresa for years, said he once met Sienna on the beach at sunset. He said she was very good at hiding emotion, but one time he joked that she looked like someone running from something, and she immediately walked away, her face changing color. That reaction, though just a casual observation, was modeled by AI as the uncontrolled response of someone carrying a serious secret. Finally, when the investigation team convened to compile all the Santa Teresa statements, a clear picture emerged. Sienna Hale was not just living in Costa Rica, she was hiding, changing identities, and maintaining a strange routine that only made sense for someone who had committed a serious crime. Different witnesses, from different areas, at different times, all described the same person, with characteristics that matched the original Sienna profile perfectly. Athletic build, watchful eyes, ability to teach yoga, refusal to be photographed, constant name changes, and living on cash. Those scattered pieces, untouched for 12 years, had now, through new technology and international cooperation, been assembled into a terrifyingly consistent story. Their statements, all from people who had known Ari or Beth, agreed on one point: that woman always lived as if she were waiting for the day she would be caught. Santa Teresa was not just where Sienna lived, it was where she hid, and the last place her trail became too obvious to keep escaping. The arrest of Sienna Hale was executed with a tactic that was both sophisticated and bold, coordinated between U.S. Marshals and Costa Rican police, after a series of Santa Teresa statements confirmed her presence under false identity. Instead of a direct search, which could have made Sienna alert and vanish, as she had many times before, the Marshals decided to exploit her biggest weakness: yoga teaching, her only source of income, and the one place she was forced to interact with strangers. A local Facebook account that regularly posted job ads for hostels and yoga instructors was chosen as the bait. A marshal undercover posted a simple ad in both English and Spanish: "New hostel needs yoga teacher, morning and afternoon classes, cash pay, experience preferred." The ad went up on a Tuesday afternoon, when Santa Teresa typically had high tourist traffic online. Just 3 hours later, an anonymous account, BAS, messaged for details. The language in the message, polite, concise, no emojis, with a few minor grammar mistakes, typical of an American who speaks fluent, but in perfect Spanish, matched almost 100% of conversations witnesses had described. When the marshals asked for a photo to confirm basic yoga posture, B sent a blurry picture clearly showing changed eyes and nose bridge. But the AI unit in Arkansas, upon receiving it, confirmed a 94.7% match with Sienna Hale. The plan was activated that night. The fake interview was scheduled for 9 a.m. the next day at a small hostel on the northern edge of Santa Teresa, chosen for its 2 discreet exits and 3 ambush points. The arrest team consisted of 3 marshals, 2 Costa Rican agents, and a female officer, disguised as the receptionist. They arrived an hour early, checked maps, set positions, and placed a female agent in the back courtyard, pretending to meditate to mask activity. At 8:56 a.m., a woman with short brown hair, large dark sunglasses, and a small backpack walked slowly up the dirt path to the hostel. Gait, head tilt, stride rhythm. Everything matched the Santa Teresa witness descriptions. As she approached, a hidden phone camera from an agent captured clearer images and sent them instantly to the Arkansas AI team. Seconds later, the marshals' earpieces lit up. Positive ID. 98% match. Proceed. Sienna walked to the front desk, removed her sunglasses, smiled politely, and introduced herself in an American voice with a neutral accent. I'm B. I'm here for the interview. The female officer invited her to sit and handed her a fake form. While Sienna bent down to write, a Costa Rican agent casually entered from the back, pretending to ask about vacant rooms. Another marshal stood up from the common area, pretending to look for water. All positions blocked any escape route. When Sienna looked up, the receptionist smiled and delivered the pre-arranged trigger phrase, "Are you available to teach morning classes in the north part of town?" Sienna blinked. That was the moment she realized something was wrong, because Santa Teresa has no north part for yoga classes. But before she could react, the marshal beside her stepped forward, placed a hand on her shoulder, and said firmly, "Sienna Hale, you are under arrest on authority of the United States. Do not resist." There was no dramatic chase, like many imagine. No screaming, no struggle. Sienna just stood still for a few seconds, eyes wide behind the glasses. She tried to turn away as if to deny the name spoken, but her face changed so quickly, it was clear she understood every exit was closed. As the marshals cuffed her, witnesses described something strange, not panic, not collapse, just a weary surrender, as if 12 years of running had finally become too heavy to fight. One hostel worker outside later said, "She looked up at the sky for a long time, like she knew this was coming sooner or later." Sienna was led out the back courtyard to the waiting vehicle. No explanations, no questions, no tears. The people of Santa Teresa, accustomed to the mysterious yoga teacher, watched from the roadside in shock that the quiet woman could be the center of a decade-plus American missing person case. As the marshal's vehicle left town, dust rose in the harsh Costa Rican sun, ending Sienna Hale's 11-year hide among beaches and jungle, carrying the mask she thought could hide her forever. But that morning, in one simple fake interview, the entire web of camouflage collapsed, and the longest flight of her life ended in the very place she believed was safest. Sienna Hale was taken to a U.S. Marshal's interrogation room immediately after being removed from Costa Rica, then transferred to Arkansas under emergency extradition. The room was cold, harsh white light pouring straight down from the ceiling, making every small movement visible. But for the first 36 hours, Sienna said nothing. No denial, no reaction, no tears, no request for a lawyer. She just sat straight-backed, hands on the steel table, eyes blank like someone who had detached from reality. Every question from the investigators sank into silence. When the marshals mentioned the name Allison Gardner, the victim they believed Sienna had taken from her home on the night in 2010, her expression changed only slightly, a suppressed shiver, but she still did not speak. In the third session, investigators placed in front of her a printed reconstruction of the 2023 cell tower mapping timeline. Sienna glanced at it, then turned away, trying to maintain calm. In the fourth, they played the AI-restored footage from the old analog camera, the frame with the dark Jeep, the figure approaching Allison's back door, and the 2023 Tech Motion model. When the images appeared on the wall, Sienna closed her eyes, the first clear reaction since her arrest. Still no confession. At hour 37, an investigator brought in a thick folder and dropped it on the table with a heavy thud. Inside were the Santa Teresa statements, yoga studio photos, the SH scrap, and descriptions from hostel owners who had recognized her. They didn't need to say much. They simply laid page after page in front of her, rebuilding the 12 years of flight she thought she had hidden perfectly. Nearly 20 minutes passed in thick silence before the investigator played the final clip. The AI simulation of the person stepping out of the Jeep, slightly tilted gait, one longer stride, left shoulder higher than right. A gait the investigator described, that's the walk of someone who practiced yoga to correct their spine. At that moment, Sienna opened her eyes, looked at the screen, looked down at her own hands. Her heart pounded so hard, she felt her breath catch. And then, as if a rope that had held her for 12 years finally snapped, Sienna began to cry. Not violently, but with the pained sobs of someone who had no strength left to resist. She covered her face with her hands, and for the first time her voice filled the room. I didn't want to do it, but I couldn't let her take everything from me. The investigators did not interrupt. They let her speak, because that moment, the moment of fracture, was what many on the team had waited half their careers for. A few minutes later, tears falling to her chin, Sienna whispered, I hid her in a place no one would ever find. The investigator asked softly, where? Sienna stared into empty space, as if returning to that Fayetteville night in 2010, then said, a deep crevice in Ozark National Forest. I took her there. Her voice shook as she described the location, a narrow crevice a few miles off, War Eagle Road, reachable only by an unmarked trail. She said she had hiked the area years earlier and knew a spot few people visited. The investigator asked for confirmation. Are you willing to take us there? Sienna did not look at them, but nodded. I can't run anymore. Silence returned to the room after that confession, but this time it was no longer heavy. It was an opening, letting air and truth finally enter. A new search was about to begin, not for a missing person, but for a truth buried for more than 12 years in the darkness of the Ozark Forest. The federal team, coordinating with Arkansas State Police, entered Ozark National Forest immediately after Sienna signed the agreement to guide them, without delaying a single hour, for fear she might change her statement. The convoy moved deep into the forest following her directions, a narrow trail swallowed by nature, muddy from early March rain, tires slipping slightly with every turn. Sienna, handcuffed and walking between two investigators, gave directions in a hoarse voice, describing landmarks etched into her memory, not from fondness, but because for 12 years she had lived with the obsession of that place, that night, and that body. After nearly 40 minutes threading through trees, the group began climbing a sharp rocky slope. Sienna stopped at a narrow spot where two massive boulders had collapsed against each other, forming a crevice almost 2 meters deep. She didn't dare step closer, only pointed with her eyes. An investigator shone a light down, and within seconds, the entire team knew they had found what they had hunted for 13 years. Part of a rib cage protruded from red dirt, covered by decayed leaves, roots, and rock fragments. There was no mistake. The area was immediately sealed in a 30-meter radius. Forensic technicians began standard protocol panoramic photos, measurements, marking every soil sample, fiber, and remaining trace. Some items were rotted. What appeared to be a sports watch and pieces of eyeglass frames lay half a meter away. Most important were fragments of arm bones, pelvis, and skull buried under 2 layers of soil, intact enough for reconstruction. During excavation, forensic staff found signs the body had been placed hastily, uneven soil, leaf litter disturbed diagonally, rather than vertically, as in natural events. A piece of black athletic fabric, identified as possibly Allison's cycling jacket, was wedged between rocks. When the skull was lifted from the ground, the entire team fell silent. No one spoke, no one needed to. They knew they stood among the final traces of a life cut short. All evidence was sealed and transported to the Little Rock lab under priority protocol. Nearly 2 weeks later, DNA results were complete. The bone samples matched Allison Gardner's parental reference samples at 99.9999%. Dental records, retained from Allison's minor jaw surgery at age 17, matched perfectly. The Fayetteville Police Department issued an official statement. The remains recovered in Ozark National Forest are those of Allison Gardner, missing since March 14, 2010. From that moment, the case was no longer missing under suspicious circumstances, but homicide with body recovered, clearing the way for formal charges. Arkansas prosecutors met urgently with federal investigators and began reconstructing the full criminal sequence based on the remains, evidence, and Sienna's statements. Body position modeling suggested Allison may have been unconscious before transport to the forest. No signs of struggle were found at the site. Small fractures on the left ribs suggested possible blunt force trauma before death, though not sufficient to determine exact cause. Prosecutors used all new data, including the 2023 cell tower reconstructed Jeep route, the disappearance of Sienna's phone signal at the exact time Allison vanished, the decade-plus flight demonstrating clear consciousness of guilt, and most crucially, the confession that led to the body, often treated legally as admission by conduct. Every piece from the original 2010 file, the blurry black Jeep, War Eagle location, Ozark Edge items, was now corroborated by modern technology and by Sienna's own confession. Prosecutors rebuilt the full timeline. Sienna had stalked Allison for some time, followed her after practice, approached after Evan left the house, got Allison into the Jeep, and drove straight onto War Eagle Road, where the last 2010-era signals went dark. There were no more blind spots for Sienna to hide in. The Allison Gardner file, once a cold case for 13 years, now had a body, a perpetrator, a confession, technology-backed evidence, and the ability to go to trial with clear charges: homicide, body recovered, premeditated concealment, interstate flight, and identity fraud. The case finally had its complete shape, no longer the shadow of a damp, cold night in Fayetteville, but a truth brought to light after more than a decade buried in the Ozark forest. The trial of Sienna Hale at the Washington County Courthouse in Arkansas was packed almost every single day, not only because the residents of Fayetteville had followed this disappearance for 13 years, but also because the nationwide endurance sports community was waiting for answers to a mystery that had felt, for so long, like it would never be solved. The prosecution laid out the entire case in a clear step-by-step argument: the black Jeep seen on the night of the disappearance, the phone signal vanishing at the exact same moment, the false statements given in 2010, 12 years on the run across borders, the AI recovered evidence, and above all, the fact that Sienna herself led authorities to the location where the body was hidden, an action that only the guilty party would ever take. The defense tried to argue prolonged mental instability, but could produce no consistent medical records, and more importantly, could not explain the meticulous planning, the cosmetic surgeries to alter her appearance, or the use of false identities in multiple countries. After 9 days of testimony, the jury needed just 4 hours to return a verdict: guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced her to 40 years in prison, stating that the sentence reflected the prolonged, deliberate, and cruel nature of keeping the victim's family in limbo for more than a decade. When the sentence was read, Sienna did not collapse or react dramatically. She simply closed her eyes, lowered her head slightly, as if finally accepting that the longest run of her life, both physically and mentally, had come to an end. In the gallery, Allison's parents gripped each other's hands tightly. They did not cry, but the restraint was heavier than tears. 1 week after the trial ended, Allison's remains were formally released and flown home to Vermont. The hearse moved slowly along the small roads leading to the regional airport, passing rows of trees just beginning to show their first spring leaves. In Vermont, the memorial service was simple, exactly the way she had been. No stage, no long speeches, just friends, family, and the people who had once ridden alongside her on the roads of their youth. Standing in a quiet circle under a lightly overcast sky, placing down wild flowers from the northern mountains, Allison was finally home, something no one had dared believe possible for 13 years. In Arkansas, the state's cold case unit received formal recognition for the technological breakthroughs in the case. AI restoration of analog footage, next-generation cell tower mapping, and the reconstruction of timelines in investigations that seemed to have no usable data left. The case led to a significant budget increase for cold case units the following year, along with a series of new laws regarding camera data retention and cross-state technical support. But the biggest aftershock was not in the courthouse or law enforcement. It was within the American cycling community. Social media and sports forums overflowed with discussion about personal safety, about the pressure of competition, about overlapping relationships, and about how vulnerable young athletes living far from home can be. Memorial rides were organized in Colorado, California, Michigan, and especially in Vermont, where Allison grew up and where her story became a symbol of the relentless pursuit of truth. In Fayetteville, the small stone bench in front of the cycling center now bears her name and the inscription, "Ride for the light you carry." Every spring, people still leave photographs, hair ties, and handwritten letters there, not to reopen the pain, but to affirm that a case that dragged on for more than 13 years was finally closed with truth, with justice, and with a community that refused to give up hope, even when the light had been gone for a very long time. Allison Gardner has been found, the perpetrator has been brought to justice, and Fayetteville, along with the entire American endurance sports community, can finally exhale after more than a decade, haunted by one damp, cold night in 2010. The story of the Allison Gardner case, stretching from the night she vanished in 2010 to the discovery of her remains in 2023, is a stark reflection of realities American society still faces today. The fragility of personal safety, the limitations of technology at the time of the crime, and the devastating consequences when early warning signs are overlooked. The fact that Allison disappeared in just a brief window of time after returning home from a training ride, combined with the limitations of analog cameras and early GPS devices, shows how our reliance on technology is only helpful when it is both timely and accurate enough. That truth remains just as relevant in the United States in 2025, when law enforcement agencies now urge people to enable safe location sharing features, log their training routes, and let loved ones know their schedules, not out of fear, but to create soft yet effective layers of protection. Another lesson comes from Sienna Hale's 12-year flight. She changed her appearance, moved between Austin, Mexico and Costa Rica, used false identities, and worked at yoga studios, all of it, creating the illusion that a person can simply disappear if they are clever enough. Reality proved the opposite. Traces always remain, no matter how faint, and a persistent justice system, like the one in the United States, will follow them to the end. It is a reminder of the value of personal accountability, that every action, no matter how carefully hidden, leaves consequences. Finally, Allison's family spent 13 years bringing her home to Vermont. Their perseverance, together with the work of the Arkansas Cold Case Unit, reminds us that a strong community is one that never abandons its own, no matter how long it takes. In a country as vast as the United States, where people can so easily lose track of one another, staying connected, noticing small changes, and acting when something feels wrong is not just caring, it can be the thing that saves a life. Thank you for joining us on this journey through one of America's most enduring missing person cases. Please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next real investigative story. See you in the next video, where we'll continue exploring the cases that have changed the way America confronts truth and justice.